During this coronavirus pandemic, the issue of vaccines has been widely discussed in the news media and particularly in the Catholic community. Reports that some COVID-19 vaccines are being developed with the use of fetal cell lines have sparked concern among many Catholics and other pro-lifers. We're here today with Dr. Helen Watt, Senior Research Fellow of the Anscombe Bioethics Centre in Oxford, to talk us through some of the moral questions surrounding COVID-19 vaccine use. Thank you very much, Dr. Watt, for joining us. My first question to you would be, what are these cell lines? And in particular, what are these fetal cell lines we hear about in the context of vaccine production?
Well, cell lines are not the same as cells or tissue taken direct from the body. Cell lines are descended and developed from those original cells or that original tissue. They can be taken from animals or from plants or from human beings, including very young human beings. And in the case of unborn children, sadly, they originate in aborted fetal tissue. This is tissue from abortions many years ago.
So because you're saying that these fetal cell lines, they're not actually the original cells extracted from the fetus. They are the cells that have descended from those original cells, and they've been developed, immortalized into cell lines. Is it therefore a case of misreporting when we hear from the media that some of these vaccines contain so-called fetal body parts?
Yes, that's not quite accurate. As I say, we're not talking about actual fetal tissue here. So we're not talking about fetal body parts, but a product created from fetal body parts. I mean, the cells are descended and developed from those body parts, and that is an issue. But we're not talking about body parts themselves. Now, there may be traces of human DNA descended from the DNA of the original unborn child, but you wouldn't say that that we're talking about body parts. And yes, the cell line is not used as an intended ingredient. It's used to develop the vaccine in.
So I suppose moving on to some of the ethical questions that have arisen, now that we know the exact nature, the exact origin of some of these fetal cell lines, what does the church say about whether it's morally okay for researchers to use such cell lines for their vaccine production?
Well, this whole area is difficult. You know, the question of when it's okay to benefit from the wrongdoing of other people. And the church did look at the issue of vaccines in a document called Dignitas Personae, and said that scientists and particularly decision makers, even if they themselves are not closely connected to the abortion or to the harvesting of fetal tissue, because of the messages that they would give out in using the cell line, should really be avoiding these fetal cell lines. Now, we have to remember that the harvesting of fetal tissue involves very close complicity with the abortion itself. So the harvester will arrange to collect the tissue in advance. Woman's consent will be got. Pickup will be arranged. So this is very, very close complicity in plans for abortion. And even if the scientist is using an immediate go-between, like a tissue bank, that's still very close complicity with the abortion itself. But what the church is saying is that even when scientists aren't involved in that kind of close complicity, they still have to be careful about the messages that they send out by using the fetal cell line, even many years down the line.
I suppose, yes, it's because some people would argue that these fetal cell lines, they were produced literally decades ago. The original abortion was decades ago. The cells were extracted then, and these cell lines have been in wide circulation ever since. Because of that distance historically, some people would say there shouldn't be a problem, and the church is saying, as I understand it, that we've got to be careful not to make these this kind of material seem normal.
Yes, I mean, certainly with vaccines, we're normally talking about an older cell line, though there are some Chinese vaccines using a more recently created cell line because in China they don't want to be too dependent on the West. But we do have to remember that fetal tissue is still being harvested in the UK, in the US, even if not for vaccine production, it is still being harvested and used. And also we've got the issue of IVF embryos being deliberately killed, actually, to extract their cells to create a cell line. So this is an ongoing issue of concern, and the messages that scientists give out are important, even if the scientists may not even have noticed where the old fetal cell line originally came from, because these cell lines have been in circulation a very long time.
Right. So I suppose it's about making consciences aware of this problem, of this situation. But the church also recognizes different degrees of moral responsibility. So we have scientists and particularly decision makers in the lab who have a high degree of responsibility because they're the ones working directly on these this kind of biological material. They can make decisions about what kind of cell lines to use, whereas people like you and me, we're not involved in those decisions. We have a different degree of moral responsibility, a lesser one, arguably. So what does the church say about the moral permissibility of ordinary people to use such vaccines once they've come out of production, if they did make use of fetal cell lines?
Well, in that same document, actually, Dignitas Personae, the church said that if you're a parent of a child, for example, you can, for a serious reason, allow your child to be vaccinated, even if the vaccine production process did involve a fetal cell line derived from an abortion. Now, this is because, as you say, you're more separated from decision makers, and the messages you give are likely to be less bad, if you like. But I think we should see this in the context of the fact that we all benefit all the time from the wrongdoing of other people. Sometimes people who are long dead, and sometimes people who are still alive today. But in many, many ways, we benefit from the wrongdoing of others. We can think of the houses we live in, which might have been constructed exploiting labourers or using money got in dishonest ways, or in other ways that would be morally wrong. So yes, many, many ways of benefiting from the wrongdoing of other people. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong, and this is a judgment call we have to make.
Yeah, I suppose that's very helpful to put that in that wider context. Most of us don't realize that we live in a web of interconnected actions, some of which were morally just, some of which were immoral, and we all benefit from all these kinds of actions in the past in a very interconnected way. And so vaccine production, you could say, is one example, although it's a very serious moral wrong that these fetal cell lines originate from. But the church does say that if there's no better alternative out there in terms of vaccines, that you can use these vaccines made using fetal cell lines if there is a grave reason to do so. But what would count as a grave reason in the case of COVID-19, let's say?
We can think of a very obvious case in which, for example, you're caring for an elderly parent, or perhaps you care for people in a nursing home, perhaps you care for people in a hospital. So you're involved in a day-to-day way with someone who's very vulnerable, who really shouldn't catch COVID. That will be a fairly clear case where, despite the messages that you might send out by accepting the vaccine, the harm done by not accepting the vaccine suggests that you really ought to accept it. It may also be, if you're working with vulnerable people, it may be a condition of you keeping your job, and there may be very serious reasons for you to keep your job. You may have family depending on you and so on, but you yourself probably don't want to infect those you're working with when the results of their being infected would be quite serious, or could be quite serious.
But would it be right to say that everyone has a grave reason to take a COVID-19 vaccine?
I'm not sure you could go as far as to say that. I mean, we can all imagine cases of someone who's, let's say young and fit, let's say working in an isolated area, not seeing very many people, and And particularly if everyone else is getting vaccinated, that person might say that the risks of my infecting someone, because they're not very high, I want to be the one who writes to the pharmaceutical company and says, I'm boycotting the vaccine and this is why I'm doing that. But yes, many people who aren't living in isolated areas will want to think about not only the people they immediately meet, but the people that they meet and the risk of passing on a disease which for many people is not at all serious, but for some people can be serious or even fatal.
So I suppose with the lots of people who are in an in-between category, they're neither carers of elderly relatives, nor are they, working in rural or isolated areas, and they might see that they have a kind of moral duty to take the vaccine as part of a national effort to make sure that a critical mass in the country or in their city is vaccinated to get the virus out of circulation. Would that be considered a kind of grave reason?
Well, I can certainly see how someone might think that way, particularly if the person has seen all the economic damage that has been done as a result of government responses to the pandemic. That's certainly something that someone might choose to do. It's important if you do accept the vaccine and if you get challenged to just be aware of the arguments because in a sense you could give bad messages either way. I mean, if you refuse the vaccine, someone could say you're endangering people, you call yourself pro-life, look at the people who might catch the virus from you, who will be much more badly affected than you will be. And if you accept the vaccine, someone might say, well, you're pro-life and look, you're happy to accept a vaccine whose development at one point involved a fetal cell line. So if you accept the vaccine, maybe most people won't know that you're accepting it, but just be ready with an explanation for anyone who might be confused by your accepting it.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Watt. And for more information on Catholic bioethics and COVID-19, including on the issue of vaccines, please visit our website at www.bioethics.org.uk. Thanks very much.